If you want proof that our church, the Holy Catholic Church, is founded on God, then this feast will give you an insight into that. Our church is founded on God, but God used very human people. Peter and Paul. As I said, the great two missionary and structures of the church. Two very flawed men, two very holy men. That God takes people and moulds them and shapes them to the mission is evident in Peter and Paul. Imagine Peter. His original name was Simon. He was a fisherman. Jesus was walking along the beach and he called him, Simon, come follow me. Simon left his boat, his father and everyone, and followed Christ. Who was the first person in Mark's Gospel that Jesus cured? Was Peter's mother-in-law. Fellas, take note, mother-in-law's the first person Jesus cured. Just remember that. So therefore, Peter was married. He was a married man. And Peter left everything, he left his family and followed Christ. But you imagine this even further. Many times Jesus said to Peter, do you not understand? I've been preaching and telling and telling. You still don't get it, do you? And in fact, this gospel, in another gospel of Mark, Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Jesus calls Peter Satan because he just doesn't understand. He's not thinking in God's way. Imagine this. Peter then goes to Rome. And in one of our apocryphal gospels, there's a story that he's had enough. I can't do this anymore. And he's running out of Rome along the Via Appia. And Jesus meets him on the way. And Peter recognises Jesus. And he says, Dominic, quo vadis, where are you going, Lord? And Jesus says, I'm going to Rome to do what you will not do, to be crucified. And Peter then realises, turns around, goes back to Rome, and is crucified upside down. This is the man who slowly understood Jesus. This is the man who denied him 3 times. But God took that simple soul and did so many wonderful things with Peter. So much so that in today's gospel, he changed his name from Simon to Peter. Kephas, or Petros, the Greek word for rock. Imagine Paul, a Roman officer, a Jewish man, a Pharisee, who was probably married himself, who was out to persecute the Christians. Saul, his original name, disliked the Christians intensely because they were against the Roman Empire, and Paul persecuted them. On the way to Damascus, he falls on the ground and is blinded. Later on, his sight is returned, and he has this epiphany that he is to be Christ to other people, and writes half of our New Testament, beautiful letters, as he goes on his journey, missionary journeys around the Middle East, converting people to Christ. Paul is an amazing man because his original name was Saul, and God turns his name to Paul. He's an apostle. There are not 12 apostles, by the way, there are in fact 15. Paul is one of them. Don't forget Matthias also, there's 14 already. So, 2 men, Peter and Paul, amazing men, the journey. Today's gospel, we hear an interesting story. Jesus says to Peter, who do people say I am? And he said, you are the living God. Is our God living? Our God is not statues. Our God is not wood. God is not stained glass. Our God is not a pagan God. Our God is the God of life. The God who challenges us, but the God who empowers us with life. Present really in the Eucharist.
Every Sunday, every day when we celebrate bread and wine, changed for us into the body and blood of Christ. Imagine our first reading. Peter is in jail. His brother, John, has just been beheaded. And Peter's in jail knowing his life is to be ended soon. But God saves him, the living God, and walks him out of the jail past all the soldiers and halfway down the street. And then he realises, how did I get here? God saves us, even when we feel as if everything is lost. It is the living God who comes to us. How many times when we feel, I just can't go on, I've had enough, I'm in jail, I'm persecuted. It's the living God who comes to us. I know that from my own personal experience. Imagine Paul, our second reading. My life is being poured out like a libation. Here's a man clearly depressed. In the Mediterranean days of Jesus, they used to take a glass, a chalice, and after a meal would pour it on the ground as a sacrifice to the gods, a libation. And so Paul says, my life has been poured out like a libation. I've run the good race, I've fought the good fight. All I have now is justice. Here is a man, again, picks up his mat and walks with the living God. Jesus says he came to a region, Cecelia Philippi. This region is just to the north of where the Holy Land is, and it's called Banyas, and it's a beautiful place. It's a place of trees and water and shade and cool. A lot of people in Jesus' day went to this place as a retreat to get out of the desert heat. Jesus took his apostles up there as disciples. And if you go there, there's a rock wall that's a Roman, Greek and ancient pagan temple. And it has niches carved in the rock wall. And they used to put all their pagan gods, statues, in these niches, these holes in the wall. And Jesus says, you know, who do people say I am? Do you think I'm one of these gods? I'm not. And Peter says, you are the living God. He's saying you're not one of these statues. You're not one of these wooden gods. Your God is alive with us. And Jesus says, Peter, you were right. And upon this rock, you, the living rock, not this rock wall, but upon you, the living rock, I'll build my church. And Christ does. So much so that from that moment of 12 disciples, 12 apostles, 72 disciples, a remnant of Israel, we're sitting here 2,000 years later, believing what they believed. But God was a living God. Peter and Paul, the witness to the living God. Our God is a God of life and love, not of destruction. Our God is not a God of death, but a God of life. Who do you say Christ is?